Princes and Priests. Chapter 12. Fortress of Ulam. They at least tried to talk to Oirion. He had to give them that, but they didn't speak any of the languages that he knew, so Oirion had no idea what they had said. They were in obviously good moods, so he guessed that the quest had been successful. He was carefully moved to a stretcher by two young orcs. They both wore their hair spiked, running down the top of their heads and knotted at the base of their necks. It was an odd thing for him to be utterly helpless and exposed, laid out on a stretcher and packed along like baggage. He tried not to show his discomfort or his pain as they hiked. He watched the landscape, looking for any signs of battle, but the bumping and jolting almost made him feel sick. He closed his eyes and struggled to drop into a trance. Shannon had said it was a few hours away, but to Oirion, that felt like a gross understatement. The orcs kept going with no rest. He hoped they had reached their destination as the group stopped marching, but they were met by more orcs. He twisted as best he could to see, but all he could see were mountains and trees. Snow-covered slopes spread out to either side, covered with bloodstains and battle scars. The orcs who met them were just a scouting party. The orcs traded off carrying Oirion and moved along swiftly, talking in their rough language. Oirion tried to pray, tried to think how he would write about this in a report, but it all ran into how tangled and messed up all of this was. Like a bad dream, he thought. The orcs stopped at a level spot before a great steep slope that fell away into a fantastically deep gorge. Kneeling, they helped Oirion sit up, taking great care not to hurt him. One spoke to Oirion and pointed out to the west. He had no idea what they were doing, but just then the sun left the bank of clouds. It sent glorious streams of light shooting through a break in a high pass before them. Light hit the mountains, setting the snow to a glow and the air shimmering with energy. Oirion was in awe of the beauty of this place. He forgot all his pain for a moment at the sheer magnificence of it. He tore his eyes off the sunset to look over at the orcs. Their eyes were filled with the same awe, but with pride as well. The orc on his left glanced over at Oirion and gestured him to look more. Oirion watched as the day sank fantastically into sunset. For one moment, he could see the beauty of the sunset reflected and doubled off the inside of the dome that separated this continent from the rest of the world. The colors were unlike anything he had ever seen. When the last color faded and the light of the stars began to glow, the orcs picked Oirion up and resumed the march. The moons rose slowly, one after the other. Oirion sank back and closed his eyes, trying to imprint that sunset into his mind forever. He'd never seen another like it. The clouds moved in, and it began to snow. Fine white flakes drifted down in the still air. Their breath froze in the cold, hanging a moment before them. Soon the wind would pick up, and winter would set in. There was little chance that they would be leaving these mountains this year, but then maybe that meant the chase was over as well. Long before they arrived at their destination, Oirion could feel the traces of magic from the battle. They reached the base of the avalanche-ridden pathway and slowly worked their way up the mountain, climbing over the snow and buried goblins. It wasn't long after Oirion had sensed the battle magics that the snow-covered ledge became a pathway trodden down by the orcs. Off to the side, there was a pile of goblin corpses. It was heaped up a good 20 feet and twice as long. Orcs were bringing more bodies down, adding bits and pieces, some that were recognizable, others that weren't. Oirion hadn't realized until now the sheer size of the battle that had been fought. The path wound up the final slope, reaching the great level plateau. Here, lamps had been raised to light the main pathway. Orcs were busy clearing the rubble from what had once been the gate. Oirion wished he could sit up to see it better, but he was left to watch as he could. What had once been the massive city entrance was simply blasted away into a vast, jagged cave mouth. Passing through it, they entered the mountain. He could see where the force of the explosion had cracked out in all directions. Streaks snaked from the opening, across the white-polished ceiling, out beyond what he could see, and even down through the massive pillars that rose up to support the ceiling high above. He couldn't help but have his breath taken away by the sheer height of the space. It rose up beyond any guess he could make. The entire chamber was illuminated with bands of light that seemed carved into the walls, gracefully flowing like lines of water or natural energy flows. It was a magic that Oirion had never even heard of before. It was similar to the Perton lights of old, but those didn't flow as these did. He knew that Jamie would have been asking 1,000 questions about it all, but Oirion just admired the beauty of it. Mixed with the soft, flowing energy of the lights, there was the remaining shattered energy of the battle fought, already well cleaned up. Any battle with enough power to blast a great hole through any solid wall, let alone a sealed gate, would normally take decades, possibly centuries to clean. The skill of the several orcs who were using crystals to clear the energy marks and remove the chill that hung on the walls had to be awesome to have made such progress. Crowds of orcs were moving about, talking in the low hum of many voices. They all had long black hair and wore it braided down their backs. White robes seemed to be the fashion. Both the males and females wore them with only slight differences in the cut. A few had colored belts, fine beaded detail, or jewelry, but for the most part they wore plain white. Oirion was carried through the main entrance, through a side door, and down a hallway. The hallways were rounded, having no corners, neither at the ceiling line nor where the rooms met. It was completely smooth, as if carved by the flow of water. There seemed to be no way to tell where you were if you simply didn't know. It would clearly be very easy to get lost in these pristine halls. He could only guess at how long a walk it was before they entered a small room. Several more orcs entered just behind them. One of them was in a pastel green robe with elegant yellow flowers embroidered on the trim. He smoothly lifted Oirion as if he were a sleeping child and laid him in a large, soft bed. The relief of the bed after days in a cot was extreme. The green-clad orc pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. He looked Oirion over slowly, with eyes full of thought and compassion. He cleared his throat a little before he spoke.
Your healing has been well seen to, but the work of the spine in a human is very fragile. They have done all they could for you. The healers you had were field healers, not masters. I want you to understand that the racial gap makes it very hard for us to work on you. The fact that you are not even native to the continent makes it even harder. I can get you to walk again, but the invasion of your energies is something you may not want to go through. I leave that up to you. I can give you full use of your upper body at far less a price, but it will be your call.
He spoke with a thick accent, but was understandable. His voice was rich and amazingly deep. It reminded Oirion oddly of his grandfather. Closing his eyes, Oirion thought of life unable to walk, and he thought of the way he felt during and after the previous healing sessions. It was hard to think which was worse.
If I can't walk, I can't ever go home,
he said. But then, without Jamie to go back to, why would he even bother to go?
Let me think about it.
The healer nodded, then stood and left, leaving Oirion to think about what he would decide for his fate. The master healer paused at the door and looked back.
Keep in mind that the longer you wait, the worse it will be. Once your energy sets in the injured pathways, healing will be beyond even me.
He left, closing the round top door softly behind him. The blue lights that glowed off the white walls of the room Shannon was given were soft, diffused, and did not burn him, as most lights did. Behind him, the silk drapes fell from the ceiling to the floor, hiding the sunken pool that served as a bath. He sat holding his left hand, cradling the injury and preparing to peel the glove off. He lifted his bloodshot eyes to the massive mirror that hung on the wall above the great bed, at the far end of the room. He could see himself, as black as the room was white. His hair, his clothes, and his skin all showed evidence of the battle. The energies he had swept up, he had used to shore up shields and to illusion his face. But under it, he had been burned. His flesh had peeled off, cracked, and reached the point it no longer even seeped. Pain shivered through him even now. Shah had put much of Shannon back together, but he was in terrible condition. It would take decades to fully recover. Again, he had to ask himself, what was he thinking? Why was he pushing things this far? With Jerome so close and his demons all about, with so much to lose and no support here, this was crazy. He had broken more rules than he had kept, and he was suffering for it. He would suffer for a long time for this, and the idea of Oirion or Raven even getting close to him made him feel sick. He slowly took the tip of a finger of his glove in his teeth and pulled it. One by one, he forced himself to pull, despite the pain and the further damage it was causing to the remains of his flesh. When he had gotten the glove loose enough, he carefully pulled it off. He looked at his hand. It was burned on the palm, even with the repair he and Shah had done to his body. The back was peeling in places where blisters had broken and fluid had stuck to the glove. Whatever magic the orcs used to light the room was soft enough that it didn't irritate his scorching raw skin. He would have to look closer at the magics here. Not even in Norwood were the lights so easy to bear. He slowly pulled the other glove off as well. Without looking, he reached to undo the row of hooks along his side to take the surcoat off. The vest below had the same hooks as did the tunic. Every layer was done in rows of small, flat bone hooks. Metal could not be tolerated in such close proximity to his body. Metal hooks on his clothes were out of the question. It was difficult to even carry a sword. All of his clothes were scorched. Each layer that he peeled off revealed even more heavily burnt clothing underneath. The tattered silk against his skin he left on. What was left of it was dried to the burns that still covered his body. To pull it off would rip open the wounds and make them far worse. He took off his boots carefully and set them aside. The last piece he took off was always his pants. It was hard for him to undress. His reluctance to see his own body had never gone away. Thousands of years had taught him how to do it, despite the reality of his scars and any pain he might be enduring. He moved to the pool and stepped in carefully, not looking at himself. There was something about the severity of the scars that was tangible proof that he was not a mortal man anymore. He had turned the hot water off and left only the cold running before he set to undressing. The water was deep, cool, and offered relief to his body. He found the walls of the pool lined with a seat which allowed him to ease down until the water reached his chin. He closed his eyes and let the cold bath pull heat out of his body. He might have cried if he had the energy or enough fluid in his body to make tears. Having neither, he simply remained still. His only motion was the small twitch of his heart that was burning up the last bit of Orion's energy in him. He focused on that, uncertain how he felt about it. Part of him was relieved, part of him most certainly was not. After soaking until the scab softened, he carefully peeled off the blouse without causing too much damage. It was not painless by any means, but it allowed him to wash the wounds clean and seal them with what magics he could afford. It would be far better to use energy now to seal his flesh than to allow the energy to seep out through open wounds. He stood up, letting the water sink back to his chest level. His head was growling at the lack of energy now. He had pushed it a fraction farther than was wise, but he had little choice. He breathed slowly and deeply. He had no real healing here tonight, just repair. Nothing but the living would offer him the proper energy to heal with. What he had just used were binding spells to stop the bleeding of energy. After the woman on the altar, the idea of orc energy made him feel a bit queasy, and goblins were even worse. Either way, it would have to be dealt with soon. Slipping out, he took the long white robe that was set on the poolside for him. Taking great care not to further damage his skin, he set the robe on over his shoulders gently. It was soft and light, but too large. Too large was better than too small. Even though the fabric was soft, it still hurt as it drug over his damaged body. Just as he drew the robe closed, the door to the room opened. He shook the length of the sleeve down to hide his hands and stepped out through the curtains. Energy from the hallways washed in like a gust of hot air. An Orcan woman, wearing a light green robe, slipped into the room, closing the door carefully. She bowed with obvious nervousness.
"Forgive me for intruding,"
she said.
"The Council of Wise wishes to see you."
Shannon was not at all surprised about that. He had expected it sooner, but was thankful for the time to bathe, to wash the stink of blood and burn off of himself. He hated to use magic in front of her, but better her than the council, no doubt. There was no way he was going to put his blood-filled gloves back on, and less of a chance that he would walk among others without them. He had to be covered. He reached through realms, slipping his energy and his hand through to a vault. A split moment, a direct thought, and he pulled fresh gloves out of the same vault where the oils he had used to heal Travis had been stored. They were not the black leather that he always wore when out in the world, but rather a pair of softer gloves that he wore at home.
"Of course,"
he said, pulling the left one on first, hiding his hands as much as he could. He almost winced at the pain, but pain was no stranger to him, and he had learned to master himself through much worse. She bowed again, then opened the door and held it for him. The shift of the fabric on his skin was painful. He knew the energy of a crowd would reopen his burns if his discipline slipped for even a moment. He caught up his burnt cloak and slipped it on over his shoulders. It would look bad and be considered improper, but he would need the shields that were woven into it. She led him through the halls of the great city. It was far older than the race that lived within it. Only in the deepest holds of the city of Ulam, in the very depths of the catacombs, were there magics as old as the ones that flowed through the walls here. Like the ancient halls of the capital of Pert, there were hidden doors that could be opened or were visible only to those with the magic keys. In Pert, those keys were tied to the bloodlines of Armand, but here that could not be. Shannon had to wonder how these orcs had first opened the doors. He could see the doors, like faint outlines, but doubted that he could get them to open for him in this realm. His guide, however, opened one of these doors and led him down a long, wide staircase. The walls here were inlaid with magics that, while very ancient, were still gathering enough power to fully activate. He wished he had the time to pause and study them for a moment, but he didn't. Despite his discomfort, he followed his guide with smooth grace. They reached a great double door at the bottom of the staircase. It was inlaid with even older magic than the others. The magic here was not generated by these orcs, but perhaps they controlled just enough of it to claim the city. The doors opened to a softly lit chamber beyond. Shannon paused. He could read no energy in the room, could not see what was there, and felt very much like he was about to step into a trap. The woman stopped inside the door, bowing nervously.
"Please."
She gestured forward. Shannon drew a slow, deep breath. Too many times he'd been entrapped. Too many years of capture forbade him the comfort of trust. It would be unpleasant, but possibly necessary to come with backup. Before he entered the room, with just a whisper, he woke Shaw. Out of its sanctuary, the demon stirred and rose up through Shannon's core like a spine-covered serpent. Painful in its own right, Shannon tried not to even flinch as Shaw placed himself in Shannon's chest. The demon was not happy at being called on so soon after working, but Shannon was not going into the darkness alone. He was not eager to do it at all, as the price was always high. But, as before, it was imperative that he not be captured. Their deal, made several thousand years ago, still held, and the demon knew what he was summoned for without explanation. He settled in, ready to defend Shannon at the slightest command. The moment that he passed through the door, Shannon sensed that it was a very good idea that he had woken Shaw. Magics clicked and locked. He could see nothing of the chamber except for a glowing demon ring on the floor before him. The energy within it was very ancient and very powerful. It radiated with a dark, deep, sapphire blue color. He knew that the moment he moved to the center of it, the color would change. It would, however, lock onto either him or Shaw, not both. The other would be free to use magics in a fight.
"Please step before us,"
an orc's voice said. Shannon knew that there would be no possible escape if they chose to betray him now. There was little difference between being locked in this chamber or locked in the ring itself. He had been fighting, running, and escaping far too long now to not know the rules at this point. It had happened before that Shah had deflected the magic Shannon had been attacked with, allowing him to slip a demon ring. This ring was far older and far more powerful than most he had faced, but Shannon suspected it would work the same. He would summon Shah again after he escaped, if it came to that, and heal him then. He walked across the outer rings of the circle, his footsteps making the lines of magic ripple outward with black light. Without faltering, he stepped into the center ring. He felt the magic of the ring lock, and Shah shift into readiness, starting to bristle as he gathered in power. Shannon's knees almost buckled at the pain of Shah's action, but he had expected it. The magic of the ring flashed, changing from blue to an alternating maroon and purple, not the colors Shannon had expected. Either it was not reading Shah at all, or it was not reading Shannon's energy right. Or maybe it was reading him better than any other magics he had come across. The light should be burning blood red for a demon.
You would draw your blood magics into our halls.
An orc demanded in a high tone from somewhere off to his right.
You sip the energy of the deaths of our people, denying them their soul energies in the next life.
Another exclaimed.
Do you expect us to believe that you walk innocently with golden priests? You linger at his bedside, absorbing his pain.
Another half roared.
You sip his energy.
Each accusation came from another part of the chamber. Shannon guessed that there were at least 12, the standard number for white magics, or perhaps twice that many. It might take 24 to hold a ring this large.
What have you to say for yourself?
One asked from behind him.
Why should we not seek to banish you now?
Another asked in a softer tone from somewhere in front of him. Shannon flexed his left hand, feeling how weakened he already was. A fight here might reduce him to crawling into a demon's hole and trading his own blood off for a place to hide. If he hadn't taken such injury, if he hadn't had his shields torn apart by the company of the last few months, this would be dealt with very differently. As it was, he did not want to fight. He would avoid it, if at all possible.
You would ask my aid,
Shannon said softly,
and then betray me when I am weakened by the magics I used to free you.
You drank the soul life of our people,
one shouted. Shannon did not bother to try to look toward the voice.
I set you free,
Shannon said simply.
You drank the pain of the priest whom you pretend to protect,
another said with bitter accusation.
Demon spawn.
He snarled the words, as if they were made of venom. This was not going well. Shannon was blind. He could neither see them nor read their energies. He was trapped in a magic far older than they were, and he was already beaten beyond anything he would dare to risk, even for his own people. What in the hells was he doing, aiding orcs? He knew why. Shah even whispered it at him, and he could only agree. Jerome. They were at war with Jerome.
Call me what you will. I set you free, and took great pain upon myself in doing so. Does that count for nothing? Would you rather I be driven beyond my means, and be forced to draw from the living, or worse, to lose control altogether? You have seen my power. Would you rather it be wild? I took only what I needed to remain in control. You cannot argue that.
You drank of your own priest,
another retorted. Shannon felt disgusted at his weakness for doing that. Yes, he had. He couldn't deny it. He didn't know how they knew, but they did.
Only to ease his pain and aid him to sleep,
Shannon said softly. He could almost see Orion's eyes swimming in the trauma of his healing sessions.
You pretend to care,
one scoffed. Shah twisted and snarled at the boldness of the accusations against Shannon. Shah's mood did not help Shannon to stay calm. Shannon could feel the energy of the ring under him, around him, slowly building. He had to diffuse them. Even if he won this fight, such a battle would alert all the greater demons around, and that was a fight he would not win.
You have nothing to say, then?
A lone orc asked in a great deep voice.
If you have already made up your minds, if my actions have not eased your fears, then nothing I say will.
Do you deny what they claim?
A soft voice asked from higher up.
Do they deny that it is I who broke the seal that had turned your city into a tomb? Do they deny it is I who carried the priest down the river? Do they deny that all of my company will testify that I have guided and protected them for months? Can they deny that my shields, as well built as they were, are now completely shredded? To justify their claims out of context or without understanding is as wrong as a flat-out lie would be.
How is it that you broke the seal?
The orc asked. Standing in a demon ring, it would show if he lied, so his answers had to be worded very carefully. He almost laughed. No wonder demons were known for their riddles.
Very good question,
he said to them all.
Maybe you should have asked that before you thought it was a good idea to insult me or deny me the passage and healing for my company. Passage and healing were promised for setting your people free. You did not require explanations when it was agreed upon. If I were what you seem to think I am, would I not have made a deal and shook the hands of your men? I did no such thing.
He chaffed at the reality of how demon-like he was, dealing with all of this. Jerome would be so pleased.
Red ripples from your very presence,
an orc to his side sneered.
Perhaps we should seek to banish you and then see what happens.
Shannon looked over, trying to see the orc who spoke so boldly and recklessly to him. It wasn't so reckless, he reconsidered. Today, anyway, not so much. Normally, this would never be happening. Once again, he was put in a bad situation because of the company he was with. There was an odd irony that he was in the company of princes and priests, and it was they who kept putting him into trouble, not the other way around.
Perhaps,
the soft-spoken orc said from his position further back and above the others,
perhaps the question we need ask is not what you are, but who you are. Blindly following the images on the surface has brought down empires on misunderstandings. I cannot help but know they travel as 10.
He paused a moment.
Look at the company. The golden child, the mother, the warrior king, the high priestess, the dwarven monk, the son of Pert, the sorcerer, the queen of the woods, the masked king, and we all know who would be left to fill the 10th place. Before any of you speak so quickly, consider a moment if it is he you test, or he who tests us. Has he not fought our enemy? Has he not set us free?
The orc's voice was slowly moving closer until he was right before Shannon.
There is one last thing I must ask to prove to my people who you are. Should any of your companions wish to, will they be free to stay with us?
They may stay if they wish, but Oirion will be healed. He must be.
Shannon wondered why he had said that. He really didn't care if Oirion was healed or not. It would be entirely better if the man chose to stay put and remain far away from Shannon. An old orc leaning on a great staff stepped out of the darkness onto the outer rings, breaking the magics and allowing the room to slowly come into view. Around the ring, 24 cloaked and hooded orcs stood. Beyond them was a vast hall that seemed to be a tomb of some sort. On the other side, a flight of stairs descended from the far wall, matching those Shannon had come down when he entered the room. The old orc walked to Shannon, his voice and face more elven than orcan. He sank to a knee before Shannon.
Forgive my children, Malchazedon. They have been under great strain and fear. They perhaps feared you would not come to our aid in this age.
Shannon was utterly stunned. He had been called a lot of things, but never that. He had never been called the Angel of Death. He didn't even know how to respond to it. The ring of orcs all sank to a knee about him. Out of habit, he laid his hand on the old orc's head. If he'd had a blessing, he would have given it.
Fate and prophecy are different,
Shannon said softly.
What can be, and what will be, are not always the same. Free will, often with ignorance, drives men to do things and make choices that they would not have made otherwise. To the world just now, I am simply Shannon. I have been known by other names, but that is what I wear now. My company is young still, needing to get back to the world. They are in need of allies, both today and later. They are not kings, but lost and exiled princes, confused children. Do not put titles on them yet. They have much to do to earn such things.
He knew that his response was trickery, To speak the truth and yet not say that he was the archangel, nor admit that he wasn't, could prove somewhat difficult. He didn't like the game, but the last thing he needed was for them to start calling Dave the son of Pert.
Then we will simply honor your arrangement with the scouts.
The old orc rose to his feet.
The priest will be healed even against his wishes. That was what we promised you for opening the gate. Rest and recover.
He motioned with a hand, opening the great back door.
The city is yours to move about as you wish.
Shannon bowed his head, turned, and quickly walked out of the ring, knowing that the ring would relock if the old orc moved out first. He needed no guide. He could follow his own trail back just fine. It also gave him a chance to clean up any evidence of it as he went. Oirion stared at the ceiling, feeling defeated. He could not go through any more. He wanted to walk, but if the orcs would let him stay, they had said he could teach. He would have a life and a place, and wasn't that enough? Maybe it was God's will that he be put here, to help them learn of him or to learn of humans as good people. He was wishing for and missing Jamie's counsel. Jamie would have never even hesitated to be here to study this new race, but Oirion wasn't Jamie, and he did not find the same satisfaction in study. He had once loved to study, but had lost it along the way. Jamie, on the other hand, had only gotten more joy from study the older he got. The door opened. He lifted his head up as best he could. He had some mobility again, but he couldn't sit up on his own. The sessions he had gone through to get him this far were simply horrid. He felt ill at the thought of more. Then he saw his guest, and his thoughts shifted. He barely recognized Shannon. The man wore a white robe, similar to that of the local people. He had a long, gold-embroidered belt. His hair had white streaks that ran from the temple all the way to the ends. Whatever magic had been used had definitely taken its toll on the Perton. He wore soft buckskin gloves and a tall collar. It was like the black one, covering his entire neck, but this one matched the blue of his eyes. It rose up out of the robe and added color to his attire in a way very out of the ordinary for Shannon. The man seemed to almost move differently than he did in the leathers. Somehow Oirion knew that under the robe, Shannon was burned from whatever magic he used to break the gate. Even from where Oirion had been, it was felt and heard. He watched Shannon sweep the robe elegantly with his hand, sitting smoothly as one does when practiced with wearing robes.
You made it, did you?
Oirion asked.
The others?
Everyone made it.
Shannon said, resting his hands in his lap, one in the other.
Even Theo?
Even Theo.
Shannon looked up from his hands to Oirion.
They tell me you're giving up. I cannot have that. I am sorry, but you will go through with the healing, the entire process.
You are not the one who has to endure it,
Oirion objected.
I have endured that and worse. You will do it. I will not leave them or you any other option.
You enjoy my pain that much?
Oirion demanded angrily, obviously fearful of the healing.
No, but I have not put up with you this long, just to have you cowered out and die. You are more than that, and have more to offer to the world. You have a choice. I will sit with you through it, or I can leave. Make your choice.
Shannon finished as 3 green-robed healers came in.
Shannon, no, I can't do it.
He tried to push himself back. Shannon spoke to the orcs. They nodded and took their positions around Oirion.
Shannon, you can't make this sort of decision. It's my life and my body.
Shannon reached over and took Orion's hand. A healer took his head, and 2 others each took a foot.
You said I could make the choice.
He yelled at them, but he didn't let go of Shannon's hand.
They did, and they would let you. I will not.
Shannon said.
I am sorry, Oirion, but this is the way it is.
Oirion was spun into the power so hard and fast that he couldn't even fight with another word. Getting to his feet was proving to be very difficult. Oirion sat on the edge of the bed, getting his balance for the attempt. He had gotten this far and was not going to give up. Beyond that, he wanted to see the others, and lying in bed was making him think of nothing but his grief and the loss of Jamie. He was also very tired of having an Orcan woman hold a clay pitcher for him to pee in, and having the flat one slid under him for more. It was really the most humiliating thing he had been through since he was a child. He was used to having Jamie right there, with the healer's ability at his fingertips. It would have been one thing to have Jamie help him. It was another to be at the mercy of a stranger. He didn't know how long he had been in the city of the orcs, or even if the others were still here. The orcs didn't speak to him, and they didn't tell him of the battle. All he knew was that Shannon had come and forced him to be healed. It had been the worst healing session he had endured, but it was the last one. He had blacked out at one point and woke to the room empty, all except for Shannon, who had sat in place, head bowed. If nothing else, he was sure that Shannon wasn't going to leave without him. It was a strange comfort. He drew a breath and pushed himself up. His legs were slow to respond and weak, nearly jelly under him, but somehow he held on long enough that they remembered what to do. Gripping the back of the healer's chair set at his bedside, he moved toward the small door that led to the orc-style privy. Normal orcs have a chamber used by those within the same social level. They would just heap it on the floor to grow mushrooms and certain beetles that they feed their imps. He wasn't real sure what to expect. He wasn't even sure how he knew about it, but he seemed to. The room was white, as every other room he had seen. The walls were smooth with no seams, and an orb was set halfway into the ceiling, glowing softly. In one corner, there was a basin that stuck out of the wall and flowed with moving water. A towel and a ball of what he expected was soap was set on a small stand of polished pine beside the basin. In the back corner, if it could be called a corner, was what looked rather like a birdbath stand in Orion's mind. As he approached it, he could see that it was hollow and had water flowing down the inside from just below the lip. There was nothing else in the room, so he assumed that was the thing to use, and he did. He held the wall, desperately trying not to make a mess or fall over. By the time he followed the wall back, his legs were trembling. He dropped onto the bed, frustrated at his weakness and how little he had done. His back hurt so bad that it was almost enough to bring tears to his eyes. He wanted to roll over, to at least be on his back, but he didn't have the energy left. He felt older than he ever had in his life. After several hours of rest, Oirion forced himself back up. It wasn't easy, but he managed to get the robe on and revisit the privy before the healer returned. He sat on the side of the bed, too tired to do anything else, but too stubborn to lie back down. She didn't say anything, just went to him and ran her hand down his spine. She pushed him to sit up more and nodded with a grunt. Offering an arm, she stood, waiting for him to take it. He reached up, took hold of the great solid forearm, and pulled himself back to his feet. She guided him from the safety of the bed and walls with slow, easy steps. Oirion had to wonder if this was not a test of some sort that God had forced upon him. The healer took Oirion through the halls in a slow walk. They rested in stages, using benches that were set in the walls. He was ready to lie down, pride or not, but they came to a room that was bright, large, and had sunshine pouring down through slanted windows in the ceiling. He saw the group of people he had come this far with, sitting together, and he was glad to see them all, even Ivan. They all wore long white robes. Only Shannon was missing. He walked to where they sat on comfortable chairs, around a table with bowls of fruit and flowers on it. In the center of the table, there was a tall crystal decanter with glasses of wine around it. After he had taken his seat, the orc woman left him, expressing a simple little smile and nod.
Oirion,
Theo smiled brightly.
You're up. We were beginning to forget what you looked like. Wine?
He offered, half rising to get him some.
No, thank you.
The walk here had made Oirion tired, and his back hurt from the length of time on his feet. Nonetheless, he was glad to be there. He worried the wine would make it too hard to get up and get back to his room. Already stumbling, wine would not help his dignity any. The energy that had been emotionally violating was all but gone now. It had begun to fade as soon as the healing sessions had stopped. He was still angry at Shannon, but now that it was over, he was begrudgingly grateful it had been done and that he was back on his feet. Seeing his friends cheered him up even more. As they happily welcomed him back, Oirion realized that he had never seen these people actually cleaned up. He took a moment to just look at them. He couldn't help but realize that these were all impressive people. Theo was the most changed, he thought. He looked like a different person with his hair cleaned and tied back from his face. With Cindy no longer hanging on him, he seemed to look a lot bigger and stronger. Theo almost looked regal in a delicate sort of way, and oddly familiar, Oirion thought.
"Where's Shannon?"
he asked, as Travis crawled into his lap.
"Who knows?"
Ivan said, leaning forward to take a slice of fruit.
"We haven't seen him since we came inside. Not a word about him from the Ulam either."
"The Ulam?"
Oirion asked.
"That's the name of the city, and calling them orcs is just wrong,"
Theo said, filling his own glass again as well as topping off Raven's.
"How do you feel?"
Tavia asked.
"Just a little sore,"
Oirion said modestly. Travis snuggled up against his chest and sighed. He went limp in a state of relaxed comfort.
"Someone missed you,"
Kelly said softly. Oirion looked down at the boy in his lap. He had never really been around children that much, but this one seemed to get into his lap a lot. He had found himself getting jealous when the boy found someone else to sit with, a rather unlikely emotion, all things considered. They were all given turns, and Oirion suspected they all noticed it. Travis had even found Raven's lap, at least once that Oirion knew about. Oirion smoothed the child's hair and looked over at his mother, who sat watching. She looked radiant in white. He tried not to think about her at all, her or any other woman. It felt like he should say something to her, but he had no idea what. Shannon's words in the tent had been eating at him since they had been spoken, and he hated that. Sure, he knew Saint Tyrardella was married, but he hadn't really thought about it. He hadn't looked at it in that way. Why did it have to be Shannon to point it out to him? He hated Shannon right now for being right all the damn time, for having to be the one to force him through things that he feared to do, and for just being so damn perfect.
"Are there any plans as to what to do now?"
Oirion asked.
"Not too much,"
Raven said.
"The choice is to go on or stay here. We haven't really talked about it much. What with both you and Shannon not being around, we couldn't really decide anything."
"Was he hurt?"
Oirion asked, wondering what they knew.
"Not really,"
Dave said.
"The whole thing just sort of wore him out. There were a lot of wards on that damn wall, plus the seal. He was thrown pretty far, but he looked all right, I guess,"
he added.
"The seal?"
Oirion asked.
"The church seal,"
Raven said softly.
"The cardinal sealed them in here to die."
"Surely not,"
Oirion said in disbelief. Raven looked at the other priest, displaying the truth in his eyes. Oirion saw it in the dwarf's haunted look and was grateful when the man dropped his eyes and said no more about it.
"How did he break it?"
Oirion asked.
"I thought it was unbreakable."
"He burned it and then froze it,"
Theo said.
"It was impressive. You should have seen it, Oirion. He just stood there holding an arm up and all the wards started to spark."
Theo excitedly jumped to his feet as he continued.
"They kept sparking until they were almost gone, and then he went like this."
Theo put his arms down and then thrust them forward.
And poof! He caught on fire and shot fire out his palm. It was so strong that it drove the fight back with its heat. Then he reached up and took ice and hit it again. It was so cold our breath actually froze. It was awesome. The whole thing, wall and all, just boom, it was gone, and we were all thrown back and covered in the stone dust. It was so awesome,"
he explained, excited and more animated than they had ever seen him. The others felt the same enthusiasm, even if they didn't show it. No one mentioned that Theo had thrown around his own power. It wasn't forgotten, but no one was about to speak of it to Oirion.
"Theo was very impressed,"
Kelly said almost fondly. Theo looked over at her, his eyes dancing.
"I am, my God, who has power like that?"
Theo said, returning to his seat.
"Shannon,"
Salma said indifferently with a shrug.
"Speaking of the devil,"
she added sweetly as she nodded her chin toward Shannon as he came in through the door. He was wearing the white robe that Oirion had seen earlier, but the high collar that was buttoned up was no longer blue. It was white as well. His hands were, not surprisingly, in his own gloves, but they were barely noticed. In the robe and with the sunlight, he looked like a different man. He wore his hair undone from the braid. It ran down his back nearly to his knees. It had not been combed smooth as he normally did before redoing it, but fell in long, wavy curls. Oirion suspected that Shannon had suffered far more than the others had any idea of, and the fact that he was unable to comb out and braid his hair was proof of that. Oirion heard Tavia breathe in sharply at the sight of him. She was clearly impressed. So was he, but not in the way she was. Shannon had fooled them. He had stayed away to heal and only came out as soon as Oirion did for a reason. It was impossible to not also notice how Shannon looked out of his black. Oirion had once studied St. Tyrardel. Shannon, in that robe and with his hair in that style, looked so like the painting Oirion had in his chambers at home that it made him feel almost like he was falling, but also a bit like he had just hit the floor. It is just the Perton in Shannon, he reasoned. They are both Pertons in white, that's all, but it was damned unsettling. He shifted and tried to ease his own pain, wondering how much Shannon hurt under his disciplined perfection.
You look almost saintly in that,
Raven said, a little unsettled as well. He shot Oirion a look to see if they shared the same impression. Oirion certainly did. Shannon didn't really smile at that. He sat in the chair that was left and smoothed out the robe's length over his knee.
It's very flattering,
Salma said. Shannon looked up at her.
Just different,
he said.
Where have you been?
Kelly asked.
We missed you.
Resting,
he said.
How do you feel?
He asked Oirion, taking the topic off himself.
Sore, but better.
Shannon nodded and then glanced around at the group. That was it from Shannon. There was no mention of anything about Orion's healing. No, I told you so, not even a look to press it. Sometimes Oirion was not at all sure of what to make of Shannon. Any other man would have made some issue over the fact that he was right about forcing Oirion to be healed.
We have been invited to stay here as long as we want,
Shannon said.
Do we?
Theo asked.
It's nice here and warm,
he added.
This is where that split up later comes into play,
Dave said, leaning back and putting his left ankle up on his right knee.
What are you doing, Shannon?
I'm going.
Why?
Tavia asked.
We could all spend the winter and move on in the spring.
These people are already in a war with the church. They do not need my presence to make it worse.
But you could help them,
Theo objected.
You apparently have a lot of power. You could set their enemies back more than a step or two,
Tavia said.
I could,
he agreed.
So why don't you?
Raven asked.
Because it would turn into the sort of war that created the bog and warped this land, and continues to do so. I'm not so arrogant as to start running into every war I cross. It is better for you, and for everything within 1,000 miles, that I do not stay and help them. It would be best to put the orcs between me and anything that would challenge me. What I am doing is not the question at hand,
he continued, cutting off more objections.
The question is, who is staying and who is going? It is a personal choice and has to be made on your own.
They all sat there quietly, considering their next move.
I'm going for whatever reasons.
Dave shrugged.
Me too,
Salma said.
There's no way I'd stay here.
I'll go,
Kelly said, and then looked questioningly at Theo. Ivan licked his lips and thought about it a moment.
Yeah, I guess I'm in too,
he decided.
Oirion?
Raven asked.
You going?
Oirion looked at Shannon. He had the feeling that everything he believed, everything he valued, everything he knew to be true was a lie, that he was on the verge of a cliff and was about to fall off, and it was Shannon's fault. He was torn, knowing how much Shannon tolerated from him, but also angry at it.
I think we should all stay together,
Tavia said.
We have begun to be able to work together, to rely on each other's strengths, and to compensate for each other's weaknesses. I'm not an orc, and I don't feel comfortable sitting inside a mountain that was very close to becoming a tomb. I don't think we can do it alone or in little groups. I think we should just look at each other as family now and do what we must to survive.
I agree,
Theo said, nodding.
Then is it decided?
Raven asked.
When do we go, Shannon?
When the weather breaks.
How long do you think that will be?
Theo asked.
I do not know.
What do we do until then?
Ivan asked.
Make use of the time,
Salma said.
Rest, and maybe someone might teach Travis how to use that dagger. Of course, we could make use of our beds in other ways than just rest.
She shot Shannon a smile.
What do you think?
Shannon just gave her a steady look. Obviously, he was not interested.
He's a child,
Tavia said, glancing toward Travis.
I was 7 when I killed my first man.
Kelly said.
He's nearly that age. This isn't the fields of Pert. It isn't the ports of Darkhan either, but worse. The boy needs to know how to defend himself. It may save us all grief later. I'd like to teach him myself.
Travis sat up and smiled. He scrambled up and ran to her. He jumped into her lap, threw his arms around her neck and kissed her nose, then snuggled into her big, tattooed arms. Dave looked with a startled expression at the boy who had seemed to hear. He opened his mouth to say something of it, but caught a look from Shannon. His uncle gave him a small shake of his head to say to let it go and keep it to himself. Dave had to wonder what sort of magic Shannon might have laid down that the others all seemed oblivious to the boy's change in manner.
That settles it, I guess.
Dave laughed, changing the topic.
I'll train with Even some more. I should be able to take him out soon, in play anyway.
Ha!
Ivan laughed.
Bring it on, boy.
Dave grinned, looking forward to testing himself against the big gladiator.
What about you, Theo? You up to playing a bit?
Dave asked. Theo looked at them, a skeptical look on his face.
No bows,
Ivan said quickly to Theo, who smiled a tiny bit. It was obvious that tension remained between the two, but all things considered, Theo was very tolerant of the man who had slept with his wife. Things might have been different for the party, they all knew, especially now that they were aware. Theo had not needed to have been so tolerant. Now that they all had a chance to get to know each other in relative ease and comfort, they were getting along, even Ivan and Theo.
I think it's a good idea,
Theo said out loud.
What's that?
Oirion asked, as he sat trying to unlock the power of the staff that Raven had brought to him.
What?
Theo asked, looking over at the man.
Oh, I was just thinking about the way that Shannon spells his clothes. It might seem vain, really, but then, in a situation like this one, it really pays off. Here we are all sore and worn out, and part of that is due to the condition of our clothes.
Shannon spells his clothes?
Ivan asked.
Really?
You haven't noticed that his clothes are always clean and they never seem to rip or wear?
Theo asked.
It's magic and a lot of it, I can see that, can't you two?
He asked the priests.
All I see is a shield,
Raven said.
A wall of clear crystal.
I don't even see that,
Oirion said.
It's like he has no power beyond the very basics of life.
Now that is interesting,
Theo mused.
How do you see magic?
Oirion asked.
Oh.
Theo gestured offhandedly.
It's in the family bloodline, and I've studied it a lot, but it's not very practical. It's nothing like Dave's magic.
He shrugged.
Which is dangerously close to illegal,
Oirion reminded Dave.
I know.
Dave looked up from his book a little.
You notice how slow I was to use it. Keep in mind, Oirion, that I'm a sailor. I don't belong to any set national laws, and so far the pontiff hasn't tried to enforce his views on the waters. When he does, he will have a war. The pirates will unite against him, no question about it. If he tells me that I need to be cleansed to save my soul, I'll lead the pirates myself. If it goes to war, I imagine that Norwood will join with the pirates as well.
If he did order it, it would be for the best of all.
Why? So no one could challenge him or his hunting games?
Dave asked. Everyone was silent. Oirion looked at Dave a long time. They all expected Oirion to blow up as he would at Shannon, but Dave was not Shannon and didn't provoke him in the same way. The truth was spoken, though, and Oirion didn't bother to deny it. That alone said a great deal to several of them.
Even in the laws that might seem wrong, there is a purpose,
Oirion said.
Even if the pontiff was corrupt, he belongs to God. Even if he thinks he is serving himself or some other entity or purpose, he isn't. He still serves God. In the end, the laws are the laws of God. Perhaps not dealt out in a fashion that is purely God's, but the law holds. Yes, the laws that are rising up against magic seem unfair and extreme, and a lot of people are upset at what is being lost, but in another few generations, there will be no chance, ever, of another mage war.
God gave us the powers and deals the powers out to us before we are born,
Dave said.
If he meant us to not use them, he would simply take them away, like a parent who takes away a toy that a child abuses and hurts himself with. He's a good parent, Oirion, and no good parent lets his children play with things that could hurt them.
God gave us gifts and promised he would let us keep them. He did not promise he'd always let us play with them. He's hanging that sword up on the wall over our bedroom doors,
Oirion argued. Dave considered taking the argument farther and pushing as he would in a sailor's tavern. But he didn't have the eloquence of Shannon, and this was Oirion, so there was no point. Dave knew he wasn't about to convert the man, or even get him to see the other side of things.
So seeing that you feel that way,
Theo said,
it's not the power you so dislike, it's the fact that a man would use it. But Oirion, if all the good men ceased to use their power, then only those who did not follow God's way would have power. That seems backwards to me.
That's why you don't like Shannon,
Ivan said.
He has power, a lot of it, and it's old. He of all people should know what magic can do. If what you say is true, then he should be opposing its use.
I suppose so.
Oirion lied, but thought to himself that was only part of it. But there was so much more to his dislike of Shannon than that.
Is that not, then, also a point for it?
Dave asked, not able to let go just yet, now that Theo was on his side.
Those who have seen the powers do not let go. They are angry and frustrated with the church and say it's not what it once was. It's not the same religion anymore. It's so humanized that most Puritans don't even acknowledge it. They hold to their old ways and their old prayers. They grieve that a false prophet is in their holy places. And Shannon wears the cleric's uniform, only in black, the colour of grief. That should say something to you.
So you think that Shannon was a priest once?
Ivan asked, almost excited at the idea. They all looked at him. None of them had ever thought that, except Dave, and then only because his father had said it, but he never really believed it.
Well, if he's wearing the same uniform he wore back then, only in black, wouldn't that say that he was once a cleric, and that the whole thing is so tainted and corrupt that he is in black to make a point? Puritans are slow to recover from grief and slow to adapt. That's why they're falling. They just can't adjust to a world without the von Armands to rule them.
Dave reasoned.
He does rub his hand like he's playing with a ring,
Theo muttered.
I can't believe that,
Oirion said, but his heart was pounding. He had heard those prayers, and he was not the one saying them. He reasoned that he had been allowed to hear the angels that watched over his prayers. Somehow, they had carried on his prayers, but that idea was faltering.
If he was, he isn't now,
Oirion said.
I do not think well of any priest who would take off his ring just because of a political change.
No one said he took it off,
Ivan responded with an odd intensity.
You know they say that most vampires are priests who became too powerful, and the other vampires couldn't resist their blood and the desire to hunt them down. Do you think that Shannon might have escaped a vampire attack? If he was a vampire, he would never be able to be out in the light. He wouldn't be able to deal with Oirion at all, and that's for damn sure. A priest goading him like Oirion does, no way could a vampire take that. He'd rip Orion's soul out and bathe in the pleasure of that touch of power. But what if he was sort of injured before he escaped? What if instead of helping him, the pontiff ordered him to be cleansed?
He gestured to Dave.
And he sort of joined the other side, like Dave said. That would explain his anger at the church and why the church is hunting him. He's half priest, half something else.
You can't be half vampire,
Ravan said.
You are or you're not. You are either killed by the vampiric magic or you change into one. They have no halfway.
Just a thought.
Ivan shrugged.
What do you think?
Theo asked Dave, who was quiet on this topic.
Me?
Yes, you. He and your father were friends, weren't they?
Well, yes, but...
What's he like when he's not under stress and being attacked by a hunter every time he turns around?
Ivan asked.
He's quiet and he doesn't talk to crew or to passengers. He gets on and he gets off. Now and then he has dinner with the captain and that's it.
The conversation ended when Shannon entered the room. He didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. He was probably used to it, Raven thought. Raven looked at Ivan. The man was apparently not the idiot that he seemed to be. Maybe Shannon was right to call him on his feigned stupidity. Ivan had shaved and was happily wearing the jewelry he had, plus the few trinkets Raven had given him from the witch's bag. The big man shifted and looked at Shannon.
Good morning, Shannon,
Ivan said in his ever-cheerful manner. Shannon looked at him as he took a chair in the common room they all shared.
Good morning, Ivan,
he said back, rather well-mannered.
Shannon, we were just talking.
Ivan grinned.
And I have a question. Where did you study as a youth?
Ulam,
Shannon said, opening the book he had brought in.
Not the same city now, is it?
No, it is not the same city at all.
You think that maybe the pontiff saw to that on purpose? He wanted to make it clear to the Puritans that their empire has been taken away.
No. I think he is an idiot and has no idea how to maintain a city like that. He never was a very good wizard. He was an over-pious zealot with an attitude about being a human in a Pertan empire.
That must be just as annoying as a heretic with an attitude problem about being a Pertan in a human empire,
Oirion said cheerfully. Shannon lifted his gaze to look at him, not impressed.
You must be feeling better,
he said. Oirion smiled sweetly, but Shannon had already gone back to his book.
It's more than that,
Theo said.
The magics of the older cities are keyed to the lines of kings, and the King of Kraus isn't home.
King of Kraus?
Ivan asked, interested.
The Emperor?
The last true King of Kraus was the Emperor Tyrell. He inherited Kraus through his mother's line. He was of the line of von Armand through his father,
Theo said.
The imperial power of his father's line was more powerful than any other line, because they were not only of the line of Armand, but also because they had married into the line of von Asa. Asa was an angel from Pert, whose line was later lost, but his bloodline survived within the von Armand line.
Wait,
Ivan interrupted.
I thought Ulam was in Kraus, and that made the Emperor also the King of Kraus by default.
No,
Theo said.
Ulam is a city-state ruled by the Emperor alone. Each kingdom has a king from a line of angels. You must have the blood of an angel in you to be keyed into the wells of Pert, and thus into the underlying power of every kingdom in Pert. The Emperor is keyed into all the wells of Pert, while each king is keyed into only one. Ulam is where the angels were called from, and where they left us from. The very stone of the earth there is sacred, or was once,
he added as an afterthought.
Maybe I am stupid, but I still don't follow.
Ivan scratched at the stubble on his head and scowled.
I am confused. Tyrell was King of Kraus through his mother, and his son Tyrell was King of Norwood through his mother. Does that mean that Tyrell would have been king of both Kraus and Norwood, as well as heir to the throne of the Emperor?
Rank does not always follow the paternal line,
Theo explained.
Pertans rarely marry in the way we think of it now. The higher rank gets to name the child, and the purer bloodline gets the heir. Tyrell was King of Norwood because his mother's bloodline flowed more powerfully than his father's, but the von Armand outranked his mother's line of Norwood. It would have been that each of Tyrell's children would have gotten one of the kingdoms in time, and he would have ruled as emperor without the daily burden of a kingship at all. In his arrogance, Tyrell could not let go of Kraus and so held it as his own until he vanished. Now Jerome has put false kings on the thrones, almost all of them pure human with no real tie to Pert or the angels at all.
So how did they choose the right line for the throne if the line of heirs was broken? In Ezir it is known as the prince and heir can shapeshift. There is no doubt or debate ever.
When the first line of von Armand died, the descendants of the other daughters of Armand came to the palace, and, one by one, they went to the yard of the sun and stood on the seal of the angels, and knelt before the angels. Many passed with no reaction at all, but eventually a young woman knelt, the seal lit up, and the city flared with life. She was crowned empress. Tyrell is her great-great-grandson. Every emperor must kneel and be chosen in such a way. It is not always the eldest, nor is it always the son. Angels look at the soul, not the flesh.
Oh,
Ivan said with a scowl still on his brow.
Not all of the lines are dead,
Oirion said.
So if the imperial magic were true, then the magics themselves would follow the line of kingship.
The heir to the throne of each of the kingdoms within Pert is chosen by the emperor,
Theo said.
The power of the bloodline is only activated when the emperor names the king. The magic of the angels chooses the emperor. The kings do not. The fact that Ulam is dark is proof that the angels don't accept Jerome as Lord of Pert, and therefore the power of the bloodlines cannot be activated by him.
The line of Armand is dead,
Oirion said.
The magic is void. No emperor will ever name a king.
The von Armands are not the first dynasty,
Dave explained.
They're the third. They were preceded by the children of Arel, the first daughter of von Armand, the von Arels. Arel was the first dynasty, but her dynasty was ended when each of her sons died in battle heirless. It was a very hard time for all races. The second dynasty was a far descendant of hers through her son Tyvenanar. The line held for only 3 generations before war and fate wiped them out. The third dynasty was from the line of Landra, a daughter of Armand, like Theo just said. To make it clear to all Pert that the line was of Armand, they took up his name. All her children and their descendants are called von Armand. All of the older lines of Pert who use Von before their names are descendants of angels. Child of angels is what Von means. Once most all of them were lines descended from Armand, but all the 12 angels who stayed with Pert had children who became the kings and queens of the kingdoms of Pert. In the last few thousand years, the lines have all met with violent ends. If the right someone with the blood of angels stood on the angels' ring in the yard of the angels, poof, new emperor. Why do you think that yard is sealed off? Jerome has made certain no one accidentally stands in that spot. It is said that as long as a von Armand sits the throne, Pert will never fall. Pert is partial to the von Armands, but that is not to say the angels will simply turn their backs on Pert if other lines are found worthy.
Shannon looked up at Dave, watching the young man without drawing any attention to himself.
Most of the bloodlines of the old kings are dead as well. Civil war will do that,
Oirion said.
There is no line of kings and no great event that will happen. Pert will never be restored to that sort of glory.
There are many lines still, fewer in power, but the lines still live,
Theo said.
The king of Arwens is the true line of Arwens. He is a von, even if they never put it on their name.
He's also insane,
Dave added.
But Theo's right, Oirion. You of all men should know that. Isn't your grandfather Grand Duke Hennon, as in von Valrine?
Oirion didn't say anything. He just looked at Dave as if the man had betrayed him somehow.
What are you all talking about?
Salma asked, with a curious and slightly worried look on her face.
They are talking about the line of rule in Pert,
Ivan said.
Do you know much about it?
No, I know about the rule of my people and pretty much that's it. I've never been to Pert, you see,
she added sweetly.
There seems to be a big wall in the way.
Pert was ruled by the god Armand in the last Great War, and he had several children. Pert says 3, but...
Dave shrugged to say he wasn't so sure.
The 3 daughters were the famous ones, and they ruled after Armand and his siblings went back to heaven. Each brother and sister of Armand, including himself, started what they call the line of kings. They have the blood of gods in them, and so extra power. The line called von Armand has 2 of those lines in them, so are a little more than any other, but a von is a von. The line of Armand was hunted out. They were all killed down to the last stray bastard, so there is no chance at a new emperor there. You have to be an heir of Armand to open the star glyph in the palace of Pert. It's really very sad. The day the emperor vanished, the whole world should have risen up in objection, but no one did. And now we are all stuck with that mistake,
he explained, in a manner that made it all seem very simple.
Wait, you're a prince?
Even asked Oirion, suddenly shocked.
I'd never have guessed.
I'm not a prince,
Oirion said.
I'm a priest.
Turning to Dave, he continued.
And how do tell does a sailor know anything about Valrine?
Dave leaned forward a little, insulted that Oirion assumed he was uneducated.
What does that mean?
I find it more and more unlikely that you are anything you claim,
Oirion said.
You pretend to be a simple sailor, and yet not only do you know magics that are not taught lightly, you seem to know a great deal of politics that do not concern you.
And you, Father Oirion, seem very blind and out of the loop. But yes.
Dave leaned back, spreading his arms.
I'm not a simple sailor.
He stood up grandly.
I am the true Emperor of Pert, chosen by the line of angels and set apart from you all.
He mocked.
Kiss me, little priest.
He held out his hand to be kissed.
David,
Shannon said seriously.
Sit down, and do not say such things.
Dave dropped back into his chair.
Oirion was being an ass. I thought it was only right that he see how it looks when others behave as stupidly as he does.
To even think such things could bring a great deal of grief upon you. Do not make mention of such again, and do not mock the throne.
Dave was about to say something, but dropped it due to the quiet seriousness of Shannon's tone.
Sorry,
he apologized.
Did you get that book open yet, Raven?
Shannon asked, changing the topic.
No.
You have the time. You might want to work on it.
Ivan chuckled at Raven. Raven grabbed the book from the floor and tossed it at Ivan.
Well, what do you think of that?
Ivan caught the book in one hand. He looked at it and tossed it back.
Oh, dear God, it's a book,
he said, mocking shock and horror.
You best burn that before any priest sees you with it.
He laughed a great, hearty laugh.
How are you feeling, Shannon?
He asked, changing the subject.
I imagine the fire burned you pretty good. You healed up.
Shannon didn't even look up.
Well enough.
Can I ask you something?
Salma asked, hopping up into her chair and sitting cross-legged in it.
Why would you endure fire like that for a race, and people that you do not know and care nothing for? Every magic within 1,000 miles will have felt the shock waves of that explosion, and your hunters now know exactly where you are. Why would a man of your power play hero?
Shannon looked up at her a moment, his hand resting on the page of the book he had been trying to read.
The same reason I would tolerate you, little kitten,
he said in a rather honest tone.
Even if you hadn't helped, your friends would have, or maybe not friends, comrades.
She chose a better word.
Then let it be the same reason that they are even that to me.
What is it?
Oirion asked.
Compassion, Shannon, mercy?
He challenged.
Is it guilt for getting us into this in the first place, or a desire to seek some sort of redemption?
Maybe a portable food source.
Ivan laughed.
Every blood wizard needs a priest or two on hand, right, Oirion? Come on, Dave, let's go play and let Oirion be an ass all on his own.
Ignore him,
Salma said of Oirion.
Why, Shannon, you confuse me, and I do not understand why a power such as you would bother. You risk your soul. If he catches you, the end will not be pretty.
If every ally against darkness would stop a moment,
Tavia spoke softly and sadly,
and help each other, it would make all of them stronger. Yet each covers his eyes and denies the truth, or they fight alone, refusing the aid of others because of their pride and the distrust created by the very thing they fight. If people would just understand that if you are an enemy of my enemy, then you are my friend.
Tavia smoothed Travis's hair. She rested her cheek on his head, her eyes quiet and expression sad.
Not even in one person is everything in exact order. Why would a world or a divinity be any different? We are parts of the whole and reflect it back, creating as we go. To join like purposes together, even if from very different points, makes all stronger as they unite. Would this group be together anywhere else in the world, let alone united in a purpose? No, I think not. Yet here we are.
She lifted her eyes to Salma.
That might answer why you are here, Mother,
Salma said, with softness to her voice that they had never heard.
But why is Shannon here? His truth will be no less than yours.
She looked back to Shannon. Travis got out of his mother's arms and then crawled into Shannon's lap. Shannon barely seemed to notice, simply adjusting for the boy. Travis, however, put his hands on Shannon's face and made him look at his eyes.
You should tell her,
Travis said.
Why?
She will help us.
I do not know why I'm still here, Travis. I ask myself that very thing often. How do I tell her what I do not know myself?
You know.
He smiled at the man and then snuggled into his chest, getting comfortable. Shannon looked back to the Sphinx. After a moment, he asked her,
Do you know what a holy vow is?
I can imagine, but not exactly. I have not heard the term.
It is a vow made on, in, and with the very fibres of the world and all of the touching realms beyond. It is spun into the stones, the air, and the water. All magic will work to its end, and it will affect the very cause of your flesh and mind. It is made in the presence of at least 3 archangels. It is rare and very powerful. At least 3 in this company are bound with such to the house of Almond. I cannot make myself think it mere chance. If I would honor that, I would be obligated to protect them and do all in my power to keep them safe and well. Holy vows made on the foundation stones of Ulam is why I am here.
She leaned back in her chair, thinking about it.
Okay,
she said, smiled, hopped up, and happily left. Travis looked up and smiled. Shannon turned his focus back to his book, his arms around the boy in his lap.
You know it's not chance,
the boy said.
I would not think so.
I love you,
Travis said with a peaceful contentment. Shannon sat, almost stunned for a moment. He had felt the truth of the boy's simple, honest love. No one had loved him in a very long time. The thought someone might was so removed from him, it was very shocking. Travis patted Shannon's arm and giggled.
Didn't you know that?
He laughed inside Shannon's mind.
It has just been a very long time since anyone felt that about me.
I have always loved you,
Travis said with a strange seriousness.
Read to me.
Shannon looked back to the book and read through his mind to the boy. Travis listened until he drifted off to sleep.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us more than you know. And remember, there are always more chapters available to our Patreons.